Brains in Motion with Mary McKone, EdD and Angela Zielinski, DPT. Please remember that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice, and this is just general discussion for educational purposes. Thank you. Enjoy. Hi, Mary.
Hey, Angela. How's it going?
Good. I'm excited for today, but again, a little nervous because this is a big topic. And I love that you tackle big topics, Mary. But today, our listeners and I, we're going to learn more about PDA with autism, or pathological demand avoidance, or the name that I actually like more is the persistent drive for autonomy.
Yes. We're going to dig into it today.
We are. And this is a profile. And I did say with autism, but it can be seen in kids. It's often seen with kids who are neurodivergent or with autism, but it doesn't have to. It can be seen in any child. Is that correct, Mary?
Yeah, we'll dig into that in just a second here. So, people with PDA tend to have an adverse reaction to being told how to behave or what to do, even if it's something that's an ordinary part of their daily life. Yesterday, you asked them to put on their shoes, and it was okay. Today, you asked them to put on your shoes, and it caused a meltdown. So it could be something that they're familiar with and is part of daily life, but for whatever reason, on that day, that was not okay. It's driven by anxiety and threat perception. So we're really going to get into that threat perception situation. And as you said, it's often seen in autism, but not only in autism. We'll talk more about that later. And it is not a diagnosis. It is not a diagnosis, but it's a profile. And this seems to be kind of mucking things up for a lot of people because people have said your kids have PDA, but it's not a thing you can have. It's more like a set of behaviors that fit this profile. So I guess it's kind of mincing words, but it is an important distinction. You're not going to go to your pediatrician and they're going to put down as a diagnosis pathological demand avoidance or persistent drive for autonomy. We can talk about why that change in verbiage also might be happening.
Yeah, and it's helpful because sometimes profile versus diagnosis, it can get confusing for parents because this profile helps you understand your child, but it's not necessarily something the medical community is going to put on documentation or treat as it's not a way to medically treat it as a diagnosis. Is that?
Yes. And actually I had a parent just tell me the other day that the children's hospital who was treating her medically complicated child had told her PDA is not, we don't even recognize that here. So now we're getting into that place where some people in the medical community aren't recognizing it because it's not a medical diagnosis. So hopefully by the end of our podcast today, you feel like you have a better understanding of what it is and what it isn't and how it might manifest, and perhaps you recognize it in your child. And hopefully we're going to give you some tools also to understand it and then also how to help it. So a really important feature of PDA is that this is about how the brain perceives the world, how it processes it, and how it responds to it. And you could have a child who did not have this profile, and then it slowly emerged, and then they do. You could have a kid who didn't have this profile, and it emerged almost seemingly overnight. And that usually has to do with infection, often PANS or PANDAS. So it's not like a child had to be born with this profile. It is something that can develop over time.
I think the note here, the part that I really liked was there are internalized and externalized presentations of PDA. And I think that that's an important note because it can show up differently, and it goes to our conversations that we've been having about masking and how that can play a role in meltdowns later or meltdowns with safe people versus unsafe situations like school or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really, really good point. So yeah, some kids will really present it externally, no, right, or start yelling or melting down, and then other kids more internalize it. I'll do this, but I don't want to. And then this is building, and then generally it's going to come out later because you can only sit on that. And then who does it come out on? 90% of the time, that's going to be mom, right? Because mom's generally the safe person and the co-regulator. It doesn't always have to be mom, but that it does seem to be the most common one. So for kids or adults who have this presentation, their nervous systems, their autonomic nervous systems, much more readily go into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. But then they get stuck there. So our nervous system is supposed to be quite fluid. So we should easily be able to move back and forth. So for example, I hear an unusual noise late at night. I might freeze for just a second. And then my brain says, oh, that was the thermostat adjusting, clicking on or off. And then my body immediately relaxes because my cortices recognize the sound and able to identify it. But when the nervous system is not fluid, we get stuck in states. And if you want to read more deeply on that, Stephen Porges's book, Safe and Sound, the first half of that is specifically about the autonomic nervous system. And unlike his original book, The Polyvagal Theory, this one is written in very consumer-friendly language. So it's very accessible. And I think it is a phenomenal explanation of how we're supposed to be able to move back and forth between states. So when we're thinking about kids with this PDA profile, their nervous system is more reactive and less fluid. So we're more, I describe it to folks as like they're always at the edge of the cliff and they have very little threshold. So things that might not cause a reaction from somebody else will just kick them right over the edge. She's like, all I did was ask you to eat your dinner. This is your favorite meal. I do not understand what's happening right now. But maybe that was the last straw that broke the camel's back,
Yeah. And then that goes into your point of that PDA is a nervous system story, not a behavior problem. And that's a piece we've talked a lot about of like behaviors are what we see and the nervous system is what's going on behind the scenes. And to help parents and educators and people, this sensitive nervous system is what's driving behavior.
Yes. And in a school environment, since that's my background, what you're going to see is it's going to get written up as behaviors and on a behavior plan. And then to try and counteract that, they write behavior goals. Writing goals about demand avoidance behaviors is not going to change the demand avoidance. It's you're looking at the manifestation of what's going on in the nervous system. So if we can always remember, behavior is a form of communication. So in this instance, what is the communication of the behavior of avoiding demands or seeking autonomy?
Seeking control. And what you said about sensitive nervous systems like that easily go into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, and that we're supposed to have nervous systems that are fluid. It made me think of that could be why transitions are so difficult and demands are transitions, because if your nervous system isn't feeling safe, something new that you didn't control is a very scary thing to a nervous system. Mm-hmm. So transitions are can be a big point of contention. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense when you describe it as my nervous system can't take one more thing. And a transition is a big thing to sometimes.
Yeah. And when we're thinking about people with this profile, this isn't a matter of won't. It's a matter of can't. So in that moment, they can't do what's being asked of them.
Yes, that is a good way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. So if we can, again, use that lens at this particular moment, this child cannot do what's being asked of me. Why? As we talk about in almost every podcast, the question is why? Why can't they do it at this moment? So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the features of PDA, and then we can kind of delve into some of these other issues together. Before we do that, I just thought it'd be helpful, like when we're really stressed, there are things that we want that are familiar to us, things that bring us comfort. And Angela, like if you're really stressed out, what's something that is like your comforty thing?
I have 2 stuffed animals.
All right, so you have stuffies, right?
I do.
Yeah. So before my doggo passed away last year, my little Maltipoo was one of my go-tos. It's so sweet and fluffy. Or, wrapping up with a blankie, or listening to Indigo Girls always makes my soul very happy. So
there you go.
You come into my house and Indigo Girls is blasting. Mary's regulating.
And sometimes I make my husband give me a very deep MNRI hug of like very specific embrace and squeeze, and then that helps.
You're right.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring these up is that we all have ways that we comfort our nervous systems because we have good interoception. We can feel what's going on in our body, and we have good neuroception. We're able, neuroception is a term that was coined by Dr. Porges. We're able to feel the shifts in our own nervous system and recognize that something's not going right, and then choose what would make us feel better. But what if I'm a child that has limited communication or poor interoception and poor neuroception and poor sensory processing? Am I able to identify how I'm feeling?
Absolutely not.
Can I identify the shift in my own nervous system?
Nope.
Can I choose? Can I logically plan, organize, and choose a strategy to get me out of that state? We'll say it together. No.
No. I mean, honestly, Mary, I only learned how to do this probably, 8 years ago when I started MNRI. So
recognizing that we're overwhelmed, and I think about this often because I have little granddaughters, and they're 2 and 3, and so when the 2-year-old is getting overwhelmed, my daughter's a speech pathologist, so she's pretty awesome at this, and she'll be like, I see that you have some big feelings right now. Would we like to take a few minutes in our room? Would we like to go outside? Would we like, and then she chooses at 2.5 what she'd like to do to calm her body. It's usually lying in the grass. So think about that through the lens of your child. Are they aware of their own body? Do they have a good feel for what's happening when they change mood or states, right? What's their communication like? Like there's a lot of reasons as to why they're looking for control, because they cannot feel, recognize, identify, and make a plan of action to change the state of their nervous system. And their nervous system is not very fluid, or not fluid at all, and they may be completely stuck somewhere, so there's no fluidity. Just kind of keep that in mind as we go along. So let's talk about some of the hallmark features of PDA. So obviously demand avoidance, right? So that's literally in the name, but the need for control or autonomy. When I was reading The Body Keeps the Score the first time, one of the things that stood out to me is that when people are really deep into dorsal vagal, into that freeze protection response, they become very myopic. So they tend to really focus on tiny details, and they become quite controlling of their environment. And why might that be, Angela?
Safety, because
right.
If your safety is interrupted, or you don't have internal safety, you look for external safety, and that is control. I know where things are coming from.
Right. And that might mean controlling my environment, because I know that my room or my house is safe, or I know that this one classroom is safe, but I don't know the other classroom is safe, or where are we going? It might be about the clothing that I'm wearing, because those clothes are safe. I love those clothes. I feel good in those clothes. Those clothes, oh, it's a new pair of pants. I don't know that pair of pants. So something that could be seemingly innocuous to us might be a trigger for a kid with PDA. Other features are rapid mood shifts, social strategies to avoid demands, which might look like, my legs are tired, right? Like, you've asked them to take a walk with you and they've come up with these, or I just want to stay here and play with you. If this is a verbal kid, right? It depends on how advanced their communication and social skills are as to how they might use that. With kids with more significant forms of autism, you're not going to get that social strategy part, but some of our kids are with this profile are quite verbal and quite astute at being able to what others might call manipulate the situation, but they're using strategies to get what they want.
It's a lot about when you said too about the control piece. If it's my choice, I'm in control. So I might really like chicken nuggets, but if you tell me it's time to eat my chicken nuggets, it wasn't my choice to eat the chicken nugget, so now it's unsafe because I didn't choose it. I feel like that's an interesting piece too of it. When you said the manipulation piece, is there's a nervous system response of, the only way I can control something is if it's my idea and I decide to do it. And that can be really hard as a parent when you just need them to eat their chicken nugget. And it becomes this, you understand that they can't do it, but you also know that they need to eat. And then everybody's emotions escalate. And knowing that it's a nervous system response, we got to do our best to try and de-escalate and pause. Our lovely Pamela Curley that we love and like all of this work has helped me with is, if you can pause and give your nervous system a chance to regulate or reset and change it from a demand to a choice, sometimes you can get on board and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And as we briefly mentioned in the intro, that there's perceived demands.
Ah, yes.
The nervous system recognizes perceived and actual as the same thing.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Well, particularly when we're on high alert all the time, right? Another very interesting thing I learned when I read and reread The Body Keeps a Score is that when a trauma occurs, and this could include pre-birth or birth trauma, by the way, he does not say that in the book, but that's my addition to that the part of the brain that differentiates time, I think it's the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, but don't take that to the bank. I'm not sure you can cash it. I think that's where it is. That when you get triggered of a trauma, your brain can no longer tell the difference between past and present. So say that I was in NICU for 45 days. I wasn't. I'm just saying, this is a hypothetical. I was a child who was in NICU for 45 days. And that first 45 days of my life, I was surrounded by beeps and bright lights and lots of equipment and people coming in and out. And then one day I have to go somewhere in an environment and my brain recognizes those sounds or those lights and triggers this trauma. Our brain no longer knows the difference between whether that happened 5 years ago or whether that same experience is happening now. It's the same experience in our brain. So that is a perceived threat. It's not a real threat. Going into a grocery store with fluorescent lights and beeping cash registers is not an inherent threat to our survival. But if that triggers someone and their brain's like, oh, I know those sounds and those lights. Nope, That's not safe. And then it's a perceived threat, and our brain can respond to it in a protective mechanism. And it becomes demand avoidance for some kids. For other kids, it becomes a full meltdown, right? Or a partial meltdown. But it can be a factor in demand avoidance.
And for some kids, their nervous system, they process that information. Their body doesn't hold on to it, and they don't have the same reaction, right? It's so individualized. You can't ever predict how it's going to show up or how it's going to, how nervous systems are going to react or clock things, I feel like.
True story. More on this, the common kind of features of PDA is they may experience changes in mood and impulsivity due to hypervigilance and intensity of emotions. That hypervigilance thing is a pretty big one. That just means we're in sympathetic, our brain's in high alert all the time. So our kiddos are never getting into that positive aspect of parasympathetic where we can just rest and digest, or they're not staying there, but they're maintaining the state of hypervigilance all the time. What's that sound? Who's that person? What's that? And you may see stimming as a result of that because their brain's trying to make sense of what they're seeing, because that is partially a symptom of the limbic system. We've already talked about a few of these things. So one, like appearing sociable, like they want to interact, but they lack understanding about how to interact. And then those perceived or real social demands can trigger them. And then all of a sudden it was like, I don't want to be here. But you said you wanted to come to the trampoline park. But now there's kids there that I don't know, and they're trying to interact with me. And now suddenly I can't do that, and I won't do that, and you can't make me do that. And I think it can be incredibly confusing for caregivers. It's like, but that's his favorite place. But maybe today there was one thing that was different that was a perceived threat to them. Or it could be as simple as the music that's playing. Maybe that particular music, the frequency was too high, they can't process it well, and there goes the sensory system. Sometimes with these kiddos, rewards and consequences feel like pressure, and those can backfire. If you do this, I'll let you have your cookie. And it's like, oh, don't try and bribe me. Oh no, that's not going to happen. For some kids that does work, and for others that becomes a trigger because they sense that you're trying to kind of manipulate what they do, and they're not having it. I see through you. I see what you're up to, Tricky. No. Let's see, what else should we talk about as far as commonalities that we see in them?
I think that this note is important. A lower thresholds of tolerance for everyday tasks and activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lower threshold. So sometimes our expectations don't fit our child, because just because one child can do it, another child might have a different threshold. And that's something to look at. And kids with PDA often have a highly sensitive nervous system. And we talk a lot about The Body Keeps the Score, but another book that I really like is The Highly Sensitive Person.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That was a helpful book, I would feel like, as well, to just kind of look at all the different ways a nervous system is taking in information. It's a little bit softer. It's not as like a softer read is like the way I would call it than The Body Keeps the Score, but useful.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, The Body Keeps the Score it's a pretty heavy. Yeah, I would agree, but phenomenal. Yeah, Highly Sensitive Person, also a great read. Oh, this is something that I have seen quite a bit, and I used to see in a former workplace, which I'll talk about just a second here. Enjoying pretending a role play, like escaping into another world, like pretending they're a cat or an animal, or needing to dress up as a character, or right. This is something
interesting
adults do as well, right? They put on this character and not everybody who dresses up is hiding. So I don't extrapolate that. But so in my early days before I became a teacher, I ran group homes for girls who'd been sexually abused. So this was like the highest level group home you could be in before in lockdown. So generally, these kids had failed multiple foster placements, plus they were teenagers, or they've been in other group homes. And these kids generally had been pretty severely abused usually by a member of the family. So just to layer all that on. But it was not unusual to have a girl in the house at all times that liked to pretend they were an animal. And when I was, young in my early 20s, because I started doing that when I was 21, I had no idea what that was, except I could see that they weren't really based in reality. But now I know, they were withdrawing from this real world because it wasn't safe for them. So in their created world, it was safe as a cat. People wouldn't hurt a cat. And people would not expect things from them if they were acting like a cat. So it was like an advanced form of demand avoidance, but it really was the autonomic nervous system in this almost like a form of disassociation. I'm going to disassociate from the real world because this is not safe, but I can be this other creature and still have some interaction with the world. I can sit here on the couch and watch a movie, but I have cat ears on and I'm meowing and petting my face while I'm watching. And that provides some social connection with this level of security around it.
Yeah, a buffer for safety.
A buffer for safety.
And I think one of the pieces that you said too, of when there is abuse or trauma from a family member or somebody who is an authority role, that means every time you have somebody demanding something of you, your nervous system is going to have a reaction. That is a very triggering and unsafe thing for you if you've had that experience. And so, of course, you are going to avoid any authority because you need to stay safe.
Yes. And I saw that live on stage when I ran those homes because, you have 2 staff members on at a time. Most of us were female. And you'd ask the child something and they would scream back at, "You're not my mother." So just by having a simple demand, even if that was a polite demand, "I'd like it if you could put your laundry in the hamper." That's still a demand. It reminded them of the person that hurt them or allowed the hurting to happen. And that's called projection in psychology. And so the demand avoidance got transferred onto me because I was the one who asked it and reminded them.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that example. That can be a tough example and it's an extreme example, but it really highlights how the nervous system can be tied to this in different ways. And that's not the same for everyone who has it, but this is a very clear example to show why a nervous system might have that reaction.
Yeah. Another kind of interesting thing I've read is that kids with PDA can seem callous, like they don't have a lot of feeling about what's happened, but actually feel quite deeply about it, but they don't know how to show it appropriately. So it's almost like another form of protection. I will show no emotion, but inside they're feeling all the feels, but then they also can't identify those feels. It's a tough spot to be in, right?
Yeah.
We often see sensory differences, right? Poor sensory processing. We talked about already poor interoceptive awareness. Some obsessive traits commonly are there, like having a really strong interest over a certain thing and needing to be involved in that thing, whatever that thing is, a lot. And that triggers can be both predictable and unpredictable. I think we covered that pretty well. So I think that's a pretty good profile. And not every child will have all of those things. It's just that's kind of like, the mixing pot. And there's going to be features in there that kids will have, but that they don't necessarily have to have all of those things. So if you're listening, thinking, "Oh, well, that doesn't fit my child, but that fits my child, and but that doesn't fit them," that doesn't mean that they're not having some manifestation of PDA, but maybe it's much more mild. And again, the question always is why, right? We're always going to ask why. And that will help us kind of trace back to how we help. So some examples of that, I think we talked about like going to the grocery store. That was one. Like an example from school might be as simple as, it's time for math and the teacher gives the instruction and then everybody's supposed to pull out their manipulatives and do this activity at their desk. And a child with PDA who has autism in this example, most kids understand that the teacher's in charge and that there's a chain of command. And when the teacher gives directions, you're supposed to follow those directions. But for a child with autism, they may not understand that social construct, that when the teacher gives directions, you're just supposed to follow them. So everybody else in the class might be doing their math work, but the child with PDA might think or say, well, I see that they're doing a math worksheet, but I'm going to draw lightsabers because I really like lightsabers. And it may be because math is too hard, or that task, they feel like they can't complete it individually. And so the avoidance, it's like, I know you told me that, but that's too hard for me. And I'm thinking about lightsabers right now, and I don't want to do that. And this lightsaber example is actually an example of a student of mine. Have I talked about this kiddo before?
No.
Probably 20 years ago. I had this high school student with autism, mainstream, and he would sit there and draw these microscopic lightsabers throughout the entire class period. They were remarkable, but the tiniest little, I'm like, oh my Lord, what is that? And I could not get him to look up and pay attention, I found, unless I talked about things using Star Wars references. So this was old enough that we didn't have 9,000 Star Wars movies. So I went back and watched the original 3 again. And then I would throw out references to
That's great.
Anakin or Luke or Leia or whomever. And if I could do that, he would look up, answer the question, and then go right back to his work. He was listening to the whole thing, but I had to make that connection. And in his mind, this was far more interesting. So like that perseveration, it really looked like demand avoidance, but generally what we were doing, he did find it quite challenging. When I asked him to write anything, he would not, could not. So there was demand avoidance. And so what he preferred to do was to draw his lightsabers.
Thinking back now, what would his posture remind you of? Like, what reflexes would you link to that as well?
Oh, yeah. He was always hunched over with a C-spine. So definitely TLR for sure. He always had to prop up his head on one arm. So 18R probably.
And if writing was challenging, probably some grasp.
Right. Probably some, although his drawing was.
Oh, that's true. So
right.
That's the interesting interplay of like safety and nervous system right there. Yeah.
But it was the expressive language part of writing and the organization part. And even though I highly scaffolded all of our writing assignments and provided frames and color coding and, all of those things, that was something that he perceived to be too hard for him. So then it got classified as dangerous because he couldn't, right? Because he was a perfectionist. And so it's just a different kind of manifestation for people that a teacher might see in a classroom, and just a different lens to look at that behavior with.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. As a review for people, in case you're not really familiar with that, our nervous system has 3 states to it. So we have the ventral vagal branch of the vagus nerve and the dorsal vagal branch of the vagus nerve. This is what the polyvagal theory, 2 branches, 2 vaguses, comes is about. So dorsal vagal is the first branch of the vagus nerve that starts developing very early on in utero. And for a while in utero, it is the only branch that we have. And it is about shutdown, freeze, collapse, being offline, being apathetic. I think of more sympathetic as safety. I think more of dorsal vagal as protection. because my brain has perceived that whatever's going to happen is not survivable. I'm going to go into full protection. So this is, I can't fight my way out of it. So if you think about a developing fetus in the first trimester, everything is a threat to survival. And so the response is that withdrawal. You can actually see it on a ultrasound. They'll withdraw into a little ball there, the withdrawal response, and that's the dorsal vagal response to loud noises or unexpected movement or things like that. And then on the other side, we have the ventral vagal, which develops later, and it's not fully developed until like 32 weeks, as I recall, in utero. So for these micro preemies, friends born before 32 weeks or so, they don't have a fully developed ventral vagal branch of their vagus nerve. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that these really early babies came into the world and their nervous system only knew withdrawal. They didn't have anything else in the toolbox, right? So it's there's some more coaxing that needs to happen with that little nervous system to let them know that this world is safe and okay. So in the ventral vagal, we have parasympathetic, which is I rest and digest. I can socialize with the world. I can have relationships. It's safe. I can communicate my wants and needs. Like I can digest my food. I can sleep well. And then sympathetic on the ventral vagal branch is ruh-roh. That feels a little bit threatening. Or I need a lot of extra energy, or I'm really excited about something. Those can all be sympathetic responses, or things that create a sympathetic response. Like if I'm out playing basketball with my friends, I'm enjoying being with my friends, and I'm really competitive. So I'm going to be in sympathetic while I'm doing that. But here's the fun thing about the nervous system. You could be in two states at once. So I could really be enjoying it, being social, parasympathetic, but I can also need this extra energy and be really excited, sympathetic, because the nervous system is fluid, right? We can recruit what we need. But for a lot of our kiddos, they cannot. It's one state at a time, and they tend to get stuck there when they shift states. So there's not this fluidity that, and Poor just calls it a vagal break, without going too deeply into that a lot of kiddos are missing that vagal break that like slows things down. Right, brings that heart rate back down. And so once they're in sympathetic and the heart rate is up and they're excited, there's no break to like, meh, 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 so we can come back into parasympathetic. Thinking about that, neuroception is the nervous system's automatic detection of safety, danger, life threats, especially relevant in PDA. So do we have good neuroception? Can our brain process the neuroception, or are those perceived or real threats to safety? Do those just override us because we don't have that fluidity or the self-regulation that comes out of the prefrontal cortex? So the emotional responses out of the right hemisphere aren't being regulated by the left hemisphere. And once that limbic system is triggered, it's all done. There's no coming back from that. What else, Angela?
It's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that you can't describe, that you can't articulate. Child's not going to say, hey, my vagus nerve isn't operating correctly. It's a lot of things that if you aren't listening to it's also a thing like doctors aren't saying, hey, your child's vagus nerve is a little bit different either, right? It's things you learn along the way. This is all developing and emerging, and people are learning more every day. And we've also learned that the neuroception also depends on interoception and proprioception, and all of them are connected. They're not isolated, because as we say, even in this podcast, Mary, things do not exist in isolation. It's just can be overwhelming to think about all of these factors when you just need your kid to put your shoes on.
Right. So if we think about PDA behaviors and then we think about the states of the nervous system they might correlate with, I think that might be helpful. Like if If kids are arguing and being aggressive, that might be a manifestation of the fight response of our sympathetic nervous system, right? Fight or flight. If they completely avoid it or create distraction or break down in tears, that might be a flight response. If they go blank or they freeze, that's more of dorsal vagal shutdown, right? And again, I'm going to say this again. PDA is not behavior, it's nervous system survival.
So something has triggered the
Yes.
nervous system to think that it needs to survive.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those triggers, Mary?
Yeah. So for kids who have poor sensory processing, those might be auditory or visual sensory stimuli, right? High frequencies, bright lights, lots of movement, being in a crowd. Any of those could be a trigger for the right kiddo. Academic demands can be a trigger, because if a child feels like they're not capable of doing what's being asked of them, or if it's overwhelming or too hard, it's much more likely there's going to be a response. And I remember having this kiddo in my class, my last teaching job, but it was a middle schooler, and everything we did is like, I can't, this is too hard. And I can't even tell you how much I scaffold things for kids as a teacher. Like we do, say we're doing a writing assignment, we do group brainstorming and partner discussion, and then we do a group outline, and then we do a graphic organizer, and we'd color code it, and you have a paragraph, frame with color coding. And I mean, that's a lot of scaffolding. And yet his first response is, I can't. And then the behaviors would start, you're not helping me. And then there would be tears, and then he'd be up walking around the classroom. It was a difficult school year, and I felt for him every day, but also I had 35 kids in that class, and you're like, it's me. I don't know what else to do as a teacher to help this kiddo. But thinking about some of the ways that it manifests, his was a form of demand avoidance. Also had a kid in that class that used to get up and walk around the room and pretend he was a chicken.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an extreme form of demand avoidance. Even though I provided all of this scaffolding and it was a safe environment, and we did mindfulness in there, and, I greeted them all at the door, and we kept the lights at half light. Like, I've done all the things I can think of, but I worked in a very difficult area. 85% of the kids on free and reduced lunch, 15% homelessness, 15% foster care, right? These kids came into that classroom with a lot of stuff. And any kind of demand was still a demand, right? And they were very verbal. So now if we think about kids who are minimally verbal, who don't have the communication skills to be able to communicate how overwhelmed they feel or why this isn't okay, and we may get a better picture of why kids react the way they react. What are some other triggers that might activate a PDA response, Angela?
Social demands. So again, being in the classroom, no matter how nice it is and how lighting it is, there's still 35 kids in that classroom. Or demands of how to interact socially with other people. Do you know them? Do you not know them? Are they familiar?
Like just going to the park and playing on the playground with other kids is something I hear frequently. Oh, we went to the park. He was really interested. He went up to the kids, but then they started talking to him and asking him questions, and he froze. Couldn't, right? It's like, I want that, but I can't. I don't know how. And then the next time they wanted to go to the park, it was a demand avoidance. Even though they really wanted to, but they'd had this experience where it was overwhelming, and their brain registered that as a perceived threat. I think you touched on this a little bit before about interoceptive stimuli. So like, can I feel what's going on in my own body? Maybe I'm hungry, but I can't really identify what that feeling is, but I know it's uncomfortable, and I'm going to react to that. And now maybe I'm going to avoid doing something because I'm hungry, but I don't know I'm hungry, and I can't tell you that. or I'm exhausted or whatever. We were just talking earlier that we're both having one of those days where we're both really tired and we don't know why. It's like, yeah, maybe I don't want to because I'm really tired, but I can identify that I'm really tired. And then we also talked a little bit about proprioceptive or vestibular. If what we're being asked to do is going to require good proprioception and vestibular function, that can be overwhelming because it feels uncomfortable and we don't know why because our brain's not registering that correctly.
I see that a lot with when you ask to do a gross motor skill that they have never seen before, they don't think that they can do. Is like they might have been on board for the bear walk, but they're not on board for the reptile or the lizard crawl because that's harder. And in their heads, they're like, I don't know if I can do that. So I'm going to say no, or I'm going to now run across the room and go get a different toy and leave the activity. Because that is the proprioceptive vestibular, that challenge just didn't fit for them.
Which is one of the reasons why I always do passive movement before I do active movement, because I want them to feel the pattern in their body. And we're going to build that pattern. And then when I ask them to do it, they have the pattern. It's like I was already doing this for you. And now it's your turn. You can do it. It helps build a little bridge there.
I like it.
Yeah.
I think this is a good note, and I think I skipped it. Can we talk about, with this shutdown or this demand avoidance, a common phrase? What if, Mary, someone says to you, it seems like my child doesn't care, or they're lazy, they're just not trying? What would you say about that?
I've never actually met a lazy child.
I agree.
When people say, well, they just don't try. If I could erase that word from education completely, you just need to try. Because there actually is no activity. There's no action around try. Just the word try itself can cause immobilization, because what does that mean? And I used to do this activity with teachers. I would be like, I'd put pencils out on the desk and I'd be like, okay, I want you to try and pick up your pencil. And then some of them would just grab it. And I was like, oh no, that's not what I said. I didn't say pick up your pencil. I said, I want you to try and pick up your pencil.
Oh, that would make me, I would be like, ah.
And like, you see the whole room kind of like start to freeze because they're like, what do you mean try? Either I do or I don't, as Yoda would say, right? But the try message. So even the language that we use with kids can cause kind of a bit of a freeze. Just try your best. I don't know what that means. You either do or do not, young Padawan, right? So but back to the actual topic there. I haven't really met a lazy kid in all my years and working in schools. It was really about obstacles and perceived ability, right? Their feeling of autonomy and agency. Like, do I have some choice in this? Do I have the ability to do it? Will I be successful? Because I don't want to be unsuccessful. I don't want to look bad to you or to the other kids in the class. So if I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, then I might just avoid it. Do you want to talk about reflexes and PDA?
I do. Want to talk about reflexes and PDA.
Okay, let's do it then.
One of the things that we've learned, Mary, is that primitive reflexes help us with a lot of different things if they get activated and integrated.
Yes. Primitive and postural, I would like to add.
So if they've been activated and they are integrated, they are helpful, they are a choice, we have flexibility, and we have the ability to choose how we're moving. If there are reflexes hanging around or unintegrated, or maybe they are wired together for some reason and they're not operating individually, it can lead to difficulty with postural control. It can lead to difficulty with sensory processing. And we know that it means that things are running in the background of your brain. So there's not a clear pathway to the cortical functions.
Yes. And primitive reflexes act as early spinal and brainstem programs that scaffold the autonomic nervous system regulation and motor planning and sensory processing. And I was reading the other day about as I'm prepping for this webinar I'm doing in August about hands and feet, the grasp reflex. If those remain, if those grasp remain, that you're always going to be having this response coming out of the spinal cord as opposed to the brainstem and the cortical functions. Like it's even lower. Those grasp reflexes are actually lower than most of the primitive reflexes. Those are about protection, survival. I need to hold on to mom for protection and survival. So when those stay active, it can really interfere with the development of the higher order functions, even into the brainstem, which sensory information comes in there first from the eyes and the ears and the proprioceptors and vestibular. It can interfere with the development there, which means then it's not getting sent up to the higher orders of the brain. So it creates this really muddy pathway in development. And when these earliest reflexes stay active, the brain then perceives that the world is not safe.
Yes.
Right.
And when you said like muddy, if it's not clear, you're going to have a bias towards alarms or freezing because you don't really know what's going on. So you're just going to protect yourself some way.
Yes. Yeah. And that might be sympathetic or dorsal vagal. As far as survival, sympathetic, protection, dorsal vagal. But understanding the relationship between the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, and the reflexes, it's two-sided. It's bidirectional relationship. They influence each other, right? So if we can resolve some of the challenges, some of the draw on the autonomic nervous system by helping our gross and fine motor movement become more fluid, by helping our sensory processing become more fluid and developed, by activating the cortices, the cortex and neocortex, then when those emotional responses come up or when that sensory input comes in, it gets processed appropriately. And then our left hemisphere can be like, oh, that's nothing for you to get too worried about. That's okay.
Processed appropriately. That's a key word. Our nervous system, our bodies, our vagus nerve need help to process things appropriately. And if things aren't wired appropriately or clearly, it's hard to distinguish that information.
Yes. And before we came on, Angela and I were talking about like my kind of obsession and research right now is on the infantile autonomic nervous system. I'll be on this one for a while, I'll tell you. And just trying to unwind that and its relationship with reflex integration. And Angela and I talk with our clients all the time about safety is the first priority. Creating safety in the brain is the first priority. Because if you don't do that, those reflexes will not integrate.
Yeah. And I have the advantage with infants. One of the best ways to create safety with infants is skin to skin and cuddling and just love and just being with your nervous system. Your skin is part of your nervous system. Being with a regulated adult and cozy and warm helps so much with that development and regulation and safety. That's hard to get when you are 10, 11, 12. We're not doing that, right?
Right. True story. Yeah. And when I was doing some reading on micro preemies, because I have quite a few in my caseload right now, one of the primary interventions is, what do they call it? Kangaroo carry, right?
Yep.
Basically that you're carrying the baby on you like in a sling. And why does that work? It's the co-regulation. It's the heartbeat. It's the warmth. It's the proprioceptive input. Those things all promote safety, which is why in my practice, I always start with embracing squeeze. I always start with navel radiation. I always start with lots of deep pressure and massage because that promotes safety in the brain and allows us to get to a place of parasympathetic so that change can happen. when a brain is in protection, it's like, I'm not changing. I might need these reflexes for survival. I'm not giving those up. It's not happening.
Mm, yeah. And sometimes this is my one caveat because I wish somebody would have said it when I first started practicing. There are nervous systems, unfortunately, that haven't felt safety before. So safety can be threatening at the beginning. So building and working with those kids, and a lot of like what I found helpful is like stress hormone releases and tapping and play, and then doing embrace and squeeze and things like that. Because I've worked with people who found embrace and squeeze threatening to start with. And that was so confusing when I first started because every class says you start there. But that's not my experience or my caseload. Sometimes it is. And often, like, don't get me wrong, probably 80% of the time that works. But sometimes we have to help reset the nervous system or introduce safety because it's a new concept.
That is true. And I have had clients like that they found embracing squeeze uncomfortable. And I've worked with a lot of women who are victims of sexual assault, and that is very common as well in that group of people. So in that case, I suggest that they cover the kiddo with a blanket or a towel and then do just a really light squeeze over that. And that distance often works. I believe you and I were in a class when we were doing neurotactile, and we had to put a couple of blankets over one of the people in the class for her to be able to experience this for whatever reason that was felt as threatening. And so it was those layers of protection, and then slowly the layers were able to come off and they were able to accept it. So that is a really, really important point that you brought up. And I cannot say this loudly enough or enough times. We have to pay attention to the state of the nervous system. And if a child feels unsafe, you're only pushing back the progress and creating a relationship where the child doesn't feel like this is an okay place. And then what are you going to get? Probably demand avoidance, because that's not safe. I was sharing with Angela that there was this video in my Facebook feed. It was from some practitioner in another country. It was in a foreign language, and they were demonstrating these techniques to integrate reflexes. It was just like a TikTok video, but the child was screaming and crying the entire time, and he was forcing them into the position, and there was no eye contact. There was no, it's okay, look what we're going to do with your body. It was silent, and he was just forcing this kid into the position with these kind of jerky movements. And my heart just about stopped. And I was like, no, no. I audibly said no out loud, because if we're putting kids into that state of stress, we're not going to get the desired outcomes. And that person and that movement is going to be perceived as dangerous, and then create this shutdown, and we don't get progress when we're in shutdown. We just don't.
We don't get progress in shutdown.
Yeah.
That is very true for littles, kids, and adults too. Okay. Well, we talked about Palmer plantar. What about TLR? And I put ATNR too, because what I've found, again, because I look at more gross motor skills often, is kids who have an active TLR or ATNR often do head movements, and their body moves, and they don't mean for that to happen. So they don't have control of their own bodies.
Yes.
Which then leads to them seeking control otherwise.
Yes.
And so that often will lead to avoidance, in my experience, because they are just seeking control because their body's not doing what they want them to. Or they have figured out one way. If I keep my head this way and my arm this way, I can do the task you asked me to. But if you ask me or demand of me to change that way, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And then it shows up as PDA.
Right. I mean, this isn't pathological, but as a kid, If I was in PE in high school and I knew it was running day, I had so many retained reflexes. Like running was exhausting and it hurt. And I mean, it was awful for me. I'm literally, I like,
Oh, Mary.
and, and so I get out there and then I'm just like shutting down because I know that this is going to be horribly painful and they're going to shout things. I'm almost 60. So this was, it was a different kind of approach in schools then, right? And I knew I'd get yelled at and ridiculed in front of everybody else. And because I didn't have the physical ability and the postural control to be able to do what was asked of me. Okay. Anyways.
It's so interesting, like the opposite experiences, because for me, sports were safety because I was outside of the house and in a structure and it was predictable. So it's interesting to see the different, how, again, every child is so different. Every nervous system is so different. All of it, all nervous systems, you have to take into account all the things that are happening at home, at school, at that exact moment in time, which is why when you said triggers can be both predictable and unpredictable, because it depends on what's happening in so many different ways.
Right. True story. So just kind of a note about thinking about those big words, fear paralysis and Moro, when we're talking about PDA, is if you just think of it this way, translate fear paralysis into dorsal vagal shutdown, translate Moro into sympathetic survival. And then the question is, why? Why are they in shutdown? Why are they in survival? If we can eliminate the reasons why, then we free up the nervous system to go into parasympathetic and to rest and digest. Okay.
And so what are some ways, Mary, that we can support a child with a PDA profile? Because there are ways to support. And like you said, if we can clear up, like if we can help with sensory processing, if we can help with reflex integration, but what are some concrete things that we can help our kids with?
The biggest one is to make connection, because in connection, there's co-regulation, right? I know in education, they tell teachers this all the time. Relationship is the basis for everything, but they never really explain why. The reason is that connection brings co-regulation, and there's trust and safety when there's connection. If I'm going into a classroom where the teacher remembers my name and remembers what my father does for a living and remembers that grape popsicles are my favorite, right? And remembers that I love lightsabers, then there's more of a chance that I might trust them when they ask me to do something difficult. I mean, this is kind of an obvious one. A lot of parents already do this, but reduce the sensory input. So provide quiet spaces, eliminate fluorescent or bright lights, reduce the noise. I know with one family, the kiddo was coming home from school and they were just, oof. I mean, that couple hours right after school was really ugly at home. And I was like, well, maybe you could set up a visual schedule for them and let the child have some agency, some choice, which is a really, really great strategy for PDA, because what does choice and agency give kids? Power. I've got the power. You're welcome. So power. So let's create a visual schedule, and in that visual schedule, your child gets a quiet time in their room for 30 minutes after they come home. And it was just quiet time. And just that one little shift where they could kind of unwind all the sensory input and demands from the day, and a quiet space completely changed the dynamic in the house. So it's sometimes these small shifts can make a really big deal. Not, booking too many things in one day. Are you driving all over town for hours? Like, don't overbook yourself. And I think as adults, we do the same thing too, right? All the stressed out mamas I talk to, and they're like, well, I've got to get the kids to school, and then I've got to get online for my, 9 a.m. meeting, and then I've got to get the dog to the vet, and then I've got to pick up the kids, and then I've got to take them here, and I've got to. And so often I will say, what could you peel back out of your life to make this more manageable? Because your child's still going to have autism, but you're killing yourself right now. So parents have to be regulated in order to co-regulate with their child. I'm going to say that again. You have to be regulated in order to co-regulate with your child. So if you are in a state of dysregulation yourself because of life's demands, health issues, relationship, finance, paying attention to the state of your own nervous system then allows you to co-regulate with your child. And particularly with mamas, kids pick up on the state of your nervous system because you are integrally connected and will be forever because you share cells. Like it's always going to be that way. Far more mom than any other person in their life. Some other thoughts on how to support a kiddo with PDA, Angela? What do you think?
I found things like heavy work can be really helpful, like you're helping or chores or being part of a team. Like I'm going to help you sweep while you're doing the hose or something like that. Like that can be helpful. Another thing like singing or like clapping to a transition, some rhythm can help you pull out of that transition, and rhythm brings safety, like you've taught us, like RMT or songs or comfort.
Mhm.
I also like the no. So this is one of the things that I try to work really hard on because I'm somebody who likes to ask. And if you tell me no, I'm going to honor that. And sometimes that gets me in trouble with some of the older kids. Doesn't get me in trouble with babies because I'm like, oh, you want to clap your hands? Of course you do. You are 6 months old. But a better way is to use like open language or not make it a demand or a direct ask, more of an invitation, or I'll just start playing and then they'll come join me. But you have a great way of like the phrase Mary has, I was going to put some things away. I'm wondering, that's the key. I'm wondering if you might like to help me. Wondering is the key thing. It's not a direct demand, just like, oh, I'm going to do this. You're welcome to join me. Another phrase, I notice this bothers you. I wonder if I might give you some deep squeezes right now.
Mhm.
The invitation. Would you like to share more, Mary? Because I really like those phrases, and I try really hard, but I'm not always. I'm
Yeah.
not. Yeah, this is a hard shift for my brain. I'm an asker.
These are things that we learned in Brain Gym. They're big features in Brain Gym. And when you go into the deeper realms past the 26 basic movements, is noticing, and Moira brought that into RMT with her as well. So it's a big deal there. And this noticing of the autonomic nervous system, but the language about that and noticing your own body and an invitation, like when we used to do brain gym balances, they're called, we would say, I'd like to invite you to, right, to do something. Not like this is what we're going to do. I'd like to invite you. And so when you phrase it like that, there's less trigger there because you're not telling them what to do. You're providing an opportunity. Now, I am well aware things have to get done, and this is really tricky. It's really hard when you invite somebody to do something and they just lay there with their head on the table. If teachers out there, if you're listening, God bless you every day for what you do. I know how difficult it is, and today's schools are so complicated. So thank you for doing what you do. Okay, so the invitation and the language, yeah, Angela, I think that's really important that we look for ways to invite kids or provide opportunities. Like you always talk about reflex work, you provide opportunities for movement, right? And we can do the same thing for that, setting up choices. We have 3 things that we have to get done this morning. We have to eat breakfast, we have to put our backpack together, and we have to put on our shoes. Which one would you like to do first? Which one would you like to do second? Which one would you like to do third? Again, that agency means that they have control and they're making the choices about what happens, but in a supported way. I do think that making visual schedules can be really helpful, even for kids who don't have autism, because there's predictability. And if you allow them to help you make that visual schedule, like the night before, okay, let's make our schedule for tomorrow. What will we do first when we get up tomorrow? And maybe they decided they wanted to get dressed before they ate breakfast that day. That's fine. It's that idea of agency that they have some input there that's super important.
Yeah, that reminds me too, we've talked about this. So from like a therapist perspective or a clinician perspective, one of the ways to give agency that I like is your turn, my turn.
Yes.
And when you said consistency, it's showing them that I always mean after it's my turn, it is your turn. But again, after it's your turn, it's my turn. So sometimes it could be the first session, there's only one your turn, my turn, but we can build on that. And they learn that structure that I do mean that you get to make a choice. And that can be helpful.
Yes. And in education, we call that scaffolding, where we build on things. So we start with one little piece and then we scaffold on that. And then we build another little piece and then we scaffold. And that's how we get that, bridge across the river built, is we're scaffolding piece after piece until we have a whole bridge. And so if you think of it that way, this is the state of where they are now. How do I break that into little pieces? And how do I scaffold on those one at a time so that we can get to that objective at the end? And I know that is really the approach you use in your reflex work, right? It requires relationship building and trust and safety. And then how do I create a structure, but then scaffold up how we operate within that structure?
Yeah. And for parents, there's going to be whoopsies and whatnots. And as long as you repair, nobody's perfect, right? Like this is all remembering like the caveats to the conversation, that these are just ideas and thoughts. And we know there's real life pieces, but there is repair and just building as much consistency and or these pieces that you can. Like we're just chatting.
And things like, if your kid acts like a cat before school every day, maybe recognize that they're acting like a cat for a reason, and let them do their kitty thing, because they're doing that because they're trying to create safety. And it may be weird. It's okay. You may be like, why are they doing that? Helping everyone understand that this is a function of the nervous system and there's a reason why it's happening. And the question is always why. Like, okay. And you could say, I noticed that you're acting like a kitty today, and just leave it. And then maybe later, another day, you could say, I was wondering why you act like a kitty during the day. And of course, this is for kids who are verbal, right? I've noticed that some days before we go to school, you act like a kitty. I was wondering if you could help me understand how that feels when you act like a kitty. And I'll bet your kiddo might have some very interesting things to tell you. Children are very insightful. I suggest we ask them. And then finally, I would say, and we already talked about like sensory input and stuff. One thing that's really overlooked is using a cool cloth, like because cold water on the face calms the vagus nerve. So it can reduce our heart rate and our breathing because it activates that mammalian diving reflex. So you can use a cold cloth or ask them if they'd like to splash some water in their face. That can be really helpful when kids are feeling overwhelmed, and it's really overlooked as a strategy. But then what I was actually going to say was about zones of regulation. So if you're not familiar, for our listeners, with zones of regulation, it's a whole system created by an OT. It's pretty awesome. And you use colors to identify the states of your nervous system. It's a great way to start teaching interoception, besides Kelly Mailer's, whole interoception program. But so green means go. I'm good. I'm in a good state. I'm feeling awesome. I'm ready to be social. Like I feel calm. That's green. Yellow is I'm slightly elevated, frustrated. Red means, oh, you better get out my way because things are about to blow. And then blue is I'm sad, depressed, tired. And so like creating that kind of chart. And when you sense that something's going on with your kiddo, you teach this outside the moment, slowly, but it's like, I was wondering, can you tell me where you think you are right now? And they can just point to it. So if they're in yellow or red, I noticed that you're in yellow. I'm wondering if there's something we could do to help you get into green. You see the choice there, right? And so if you already have a predetermined kind of choice board of things they might do, that might be trampoline, swing, deep squeezes, rocking, whatever you've decided works for your kiddo, And they can choose that after you do that, then you come back. I'm wondering, are you still in the yellow or do you feel like you're in the green now? Oh, I'm still in yellow. Is there something else from your board that you might like to choose? So you're providing this scaffolding and the structure and this pathway for kids to be able to identify how they're feeling, interoception, the state of their nervous system, neuroception, make choices about it, and then reevaluate, which is prefrontal cortex. So we're really creating this pathway of regulation, and helping them see that they do have agency and control over their own reactions. It can be really, really powerful, a really powerful tool.
I've seen that be most successful when the parent does it for themselves.
Yes.
Oh, I'm feeling a little yellow right now because I'm cooking and I'm warm. So I'm going to turn on the fan. And so they make it about themselves and they keep modeling it and talk out loud so that just children can observe the process. And I've seen that be like one of a really great tool that the child then can use the tool themselves in the future.
Absolutely. And that idea of modeling and having the parent model and teachers model that too, can't be understated. I did that as a teacher a lot. Wow, I'm really feeling frustrated today. That class before you guys was pretty tough, and I just need a minute to do some hookups. Maybe you guys could join me because that would help me feel better, and then everybody comes down with me, right? And these were high schoolers, and oftentimes they would play along,
Thank you so much for this topic. And I think that we covered a lot. We're going to drop a resource or two in the show notes. Is there any parting thoughts or things you'd like to share, Mary?
On this one, I don't think so. I do want to say that if you sign up for my newsletter, when we send the newsletter out, Heather, my assistant who puts the newsletters together, she always puts links to the things that we mentioned under the podcast episode. So if you're wondering, like, what was that book they mentioned, there'll always be a link to it in the newsletter. So you could sign up for that at brain-works.org.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you, Mary.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure.
You can email us at brainsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. You can find Mary at her website, brain-works.org, or on Facebook with her Facebook Reflex Integration groups. If you would like that information, please check our show notes. And you can find Angela at angelapt.com or rainbowdragonbooks.com. Thanks for listening.